Hello everyone and welcome back to this video. Today we are learning about multi-dimensional arrays, specifically the two-dimensional arrays or 2D arrays. If you're familiar with arrays, the basic arrays, this video is going to help you extend your knowledge to include this incredibly useful data structure called 2D structure or 2D arrays. So far we learned about 1D arrays. We learned how to declare a 1D array and how to represent them in memory. To refresh our mind, we could easily define a 1D array by giving the type of elements we want to store in our array, then followed by square brackets, then giving the array name. Then directly we could assign values to our array. Suppose I want to store 1, 2, 3 in my array. This was one way of defining and initializing a 1D array, or I can define a fixed size 1D array. Say I want to call it array2 or ARR2 new int of say I want to define an array of size 5. So in the memory, a 1D array is represented as one row or having a one dimension. A contiguous blocks of memory is allocated for a 1D array, forming a one row or one dimensional representation of data starting from 0, 1, 2, 3. I can store here 1, 2, 3, 4, only integer values. So now in this lesson, let's understand what a 2D array is. Just like a regular array, a 2D array is a collection of similar type of elements. So once we define a 1D array, the type, when we say the type of the array is integer, means we can only store integer type values. We cannot store mixed type of values. We cannot store a string or character or floating point in this array. This is the same with the 2D array. However, while a regular array has one single row of elements, a 2D array has multiple rows and columns, very much like a table or a matrix. So in a 2D array, basically we have multiple rows, while in a single array we have a single row. Let's visualize a multi-dimensional array. So suppose I have one row of elements. Say this row has 3 items or 3 columns. Then I can have a second row. The second row, each row having the same size. So this row has 1, 2, 3 columns. So the second row should also have 1, 2, 3 columns. I can have one more row in my 2D array having 3 items. Then I can have another row, as much row as I want or as much column as I want. So this is multiple rows constituting a one two-dimensional array. We have 2 dimension, we have rows here, and also we have columns here. In this case, I have 1 row, 2 row, 3 row, and 4 rows, and 1 column, 2 column, 3 column. So this basically represents a matrix form. This represents data in a form of matrix or tabular. Say this is a matrix of having 4 rows and 3 columns, 4 by 3. Say I want to store 1, 2, 3 in the first row, so I can do 1, 2, 3 in the first row. Say I want to store 4, 5, 6 in the second row. I can store say 7, 8, 9 in the third row, and in the fourth row say I want to store 10, 11, and 12. We can see that the data is represented much like a matrix of 4 by 3. So 4 by 3 means having 4 rows and 3 columns. In a 1D array, we could access each element of the 1D array by its index value 0, 1, 2, 3. Suppose I wanted to, and let's call this array, I want to store access number 3, so I could easily subscript that and pass the index value, single index value. Since it's a 1D array, I can pass only single index value, which is 2. But in the case of 2D array, we can access elements by passing 2 indices. So in a 2D array, each item has an index value, which is made up of two indices values. So the first item in a 2D array has an index value of 0, 0, because this is the zeroth row, this is the first row, and this is the second row. This is the first row is have 0 index, the second row has index of 1, third row has index 2, and fourth row has index 3. Same way columns have index values. So the first column have index value of 0, the second column have index value of 1, and the third column has index value of 2. So using this row and column index values, we can access each element of a 2D array. Say I want to access the first element, so the first element will have index value 0, 0. So using the 0, 0 subscript, I can access the first element. So when I pass the two index values, so the first index value representing the row index, and the second index value represents the column index. So item 1, or this first element, is located in the 0th column, and also 0th row and 0th column. So that's why it has an index value of 0, 0. So item 2 has an index value of, it is located in row 0, so it has 0, and located in column 1, it has 0, 1. So using the 0, 1, we can access this second element. So the third element, or number 3, is located at row 0. So we are going to give the first index value as 0, and column 2, it is located in column 2. So item 3 is accessed by 0, 2 index value. Same case with item 4. Item 4 is located at row 1. So we can access it by subscripting 1, and it is located in column 0. So by 1, 0, so this 4 is accessed. Same way, if you want to access 12, so 12 is located at row 3. So we are going to give the first subscript as 3, 3, and it is located at column 2, 3 by 2. So the location of the item 12 is at index 3 by 2. This way we can access the elements of a two-dimensional array. So basically, a two-dimensional array is essentially an array of arrays. We can call it also array of arrays. Say our main array having an array of array. So each row is forming an array. This is one array. This is another array. So this is another array. Multiple arrays of the same size constituting a multi-dimensional array or two-dimensional array. In a 1D array, say I have a 1D array, let's call it ARR equal to 1, 2. Say I have an array of 3 elements, 1, 2, 3. So each element of a 1D array is an integer. Okay, but in a case of 2D array, each element of a 2D array is itself an array. That's why we call a 2D array an array of array. Say I have a 2D array of, let's call it ARR 2D. So instead of each element being an integer, each element of a 2D array itself is an array. So this is the first element. Say it has 1, 2. The second element of the array is again an array. Instead of being an integer, it's again going to be an array of the same size as first array. So each array inside the main array is going to have the same elements, same number of elements. So say second array or second element of the 2D array have 4, 5. Then the third element here is an integer, but in case of a 2D array, again the third element is going to be another array. So say I have 6, 7. So this way, an array, a 2D array, is called an array of array. So this is an array, our main array of arrays. It has another arrays inside that. So this is this array has 1, 2, 3 rows. So this forms a 3, and each row has 1, 2 elements. So 3 by 2 matrix. So if we wanted to represent this array of array or 2D array, in the form of matrix. So this is going to be my first row having 1, comma 2. This is going to be the second element is going to be the second row. So this is first row, this is second row, and this is the third row of 2D array. So the second row is going to be 4, comma 5, and the third row is going to be 6, comma 7. That's why we call a 2D array most of the time an array of arrays, because each element of a 2D array by itself is another array. So to summarize, a 2D structure allows us to store data in grid-like fashion with each cell in the grid accessible through a pair of indices. We saw that this is a grid-like fashion representation of data. Each data or cell is accessed by a pair of indices, the first element having 0, 0 indices, etc. Now let's take a look how to declare and initialize a 2D array. It's quite similar to one-dimensional or regular arrays, but in the case of 2D arrays, we put a comma inside this square bracket denoting the number of dimension we want. So inside this square bracket, I put 1 comma here, denoting that we have 2 dimensions, 1 dimension here and 1 dimension here. If we have multiple dimension arrays, we add more commas, but in the case of 2-dimensional array, we just add only 1 comma. Then we give the name of our array. Say I want to call it array 2D or 2-dimensional array equal to new int of. In the case of 1-dimensional array, since we have 1 dimension or 1 row, we only pass 1 number. But in case of 2D arrays, we pass the number of rows. Say I want to declare a 2D array of 3 by 2 or having 3 rows and 2 columns. So I'm going to first pass the number of rows I want, then the number of columns I want in my 2D array. So this way we can declare a 2D array having 3 rows and 2 columns. So the other way is to directly initialize the elements of an array. So say I want to declare a 2D array. Let's call it ARR 2D 2 or the second 2D array. We can directly initialize it with elements. As I said, in the case of single dimensional array or 1-dimensional array, each element is a value or an integer value, but in case of multi-dimensional array, each element is a 2-dimensional, each element is another array. So this is my main array. Inside main array I have elements. Each element is another array. Say I want to have a 3 by 2 array. So 3 means the number of rows and 2 means the number of columns. Basically this means that my array has 3 elements and each element of the array has 2 items inside that. Okay, so let's define 3 elements, 1 element, 2 element. Each element is an array, 3 elements. Also, this 2 denotes that each element or each array having 2 elements or 2 items. So let's say I want to store 1, 2 for the first array, and then I want to store 3, 4, 3, 4 for the second array. Say I want to store 5, 6 for the third array. This way we can directly declare and initialize a 2D array. To make it more readable, let me press enter here and press enter here, press enter here. So this way we can see that each element of the array forms a tabular form or a matrix form. So this is being the first row, this is being the second row, and this is the third row of the 2D array. And also this is the first column and this is the second column. We can access number 1 by indexing 0, 0. This can be accessed by indexing 0, 1. This can be accessed by 1, 0. And this can be accessed by 1, 1. That way we can access each element of an array. Suppose I want to access the first element, so we can access it. Let's print the first element. 2D array. Array 2D array of 2, the second 2D array. So 0, 0 is going to be the index value or the address of this element. If I print that, so this is going to print number 1. Cool, number 1 is printed. Say I want to access or print number 6. So number 6 is located at row 0 or row 1, row 2. So I pass the number of rows as 2, and it is located at column 0, column 1. So it is located at row 2, column 1. So I pass 2 by 2 comma 1. So it's going to print number 6. Number 6 is printed. So this way we can access the element of the array. Say I want to print all the elements of the array, I can use 2 for loops. In the case of a single dimensional array, we could print the elements using only one single for loop. But in the case of 2-dimensional array, we have to use 2 for loop or nested loops. One for loop to loop over the rows of the elements, then another for loop or the inner loop to loop through the columns of each the columns of the 2-dimensional array. So I'm going to loop through the rows first. So for that I'm going to use a for loop for int I equal to 0, I less than a number of rows. To get the number of rows in C# we have the get length method. So array name, my array name is array2d2 dot get length. So when I pass 0 in this get length method, it's going to give me the number of rows in a 2D array. So in this case I have 3 rows, so it's going to give me 3. So I'm going to loop through all the rows of the 2D array. Let's not call it I, let's call it row, so that we can understand that. For row less than number of rows, row plus plus. Then I'm going to loop through the columns of the 2D array. For that I will use another for loop for int column equal to 0, column less than a name of array dot get length. This time I pass number 1 to get length to get the number of columns in my 2D array, then column plus plus. So I can easily print array name of array of row comma column, the index values. So let me print that. We can see 6. Okay, 6 is printed from previous print line. Let me delete that. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is printed. Since I'm using print line, each time it prints a new line, so I'm going to give a space between each element. Once I printed the first row, I'm going to print a new line here. So this time we can see that it is printed same as this one. We have the first row as 1, 2, second row we have 3, 4, and 5, 6. So what basically the outer loop is going to do is it will loop for the first time. The row number is going to be 0, and for the 0 row it's going to loop through all the columns. So the number of column is going to be 0. First it is going to print 0, 0, then the number of column is going to increase by 1. So it's going to print row is 0 and column is going to be 1. 0, 1 is printed. Then number of column is going to be 3. 3 is not less than the number of column is going to get 2. 2 is not less than the 2 is getting out of the inner loop. Then the outer for loop is executed again. Second time number of row is going to be 1. So this row is printed. Number of row is 1, and for this for loop column is again 0. So 1, 0 is printed. Then again inner loop is executed, so number of column becomes 1, so 1, 1 is printed this way, and finally row becomes 2, 2, 0 is printed, and second round of inner loop 2, 1 is printed. This way we can print the elements of a 2D array. So this was a quick introduction about 2-dimensional array. So before I close this video, let's talk about the 2 ways we can initialize a 2D array, we can initialize the 2D array at the compile time. So this is the compile time initialization of a 2D array. We could easily initialize a 2D array at the compile time. Compile time initialization. We can also initialize a 2D array at the runtime by taking the input from the user and the size of the array from the user. So let me comment out all these lines of code and let's initialize the 2D array at the runtime. Then we will wrap up this video. So to initialize, first I'm going to prompt the user to enter the number of rows. So enter the number of rows. I'm going to take the number of rows and store it in a row variable of type integer. Let's call it, since I can take the user input using the console.readLine method. Console.readLine method. This readLine method returns an integer, a string. I gotta cast it using the int.parse method or convert method. So I'm gonna use the int.parse method to convert this string to integer. Int.parse console.readLine. So this is going to be small I. So next I'm going to prompt the user to enter the number of columns. Enter the number of columns. So I take the number of columns from the user and store it in column variable or col variable. Then I'm going to define a 2D array of having size rows and columns. To define a 2D array, we learned that we can do that by giving the type of values we want to store, followed by square bracket, and inside a square bracket we put a comma. Then the name of array, say I want to call it array or arr equal to new int of number of rows. So we got the rows from the user. Then the number of columns, we got column from the user. So this way we could easily initialize, declare the array. Now let's initialize the array to the elements. To initialize, I'm going to take the elements from the user using two for loops. So I'm going to first loop through the rows for int I equal to 0, I less than row, I plus plus. Then in the second inner loop, I'm going to loop through the columns for int j equal to 0, j less than column, and j plus plus. So each time I'm going to take the user input, so I can do that by this line of code. I'm gonna copy that. So I'm gonna store this to row index, comma column index of the array, 2D array. So by doing array of row, comma column equal to this input. So this is comma. So this way I can assign values to the 2D array. So to print this 2D array, I'm going to copy these lines of code and rename that instead of typing all again. So let me uncomment these lines of code for int row equal to, since we have row here, let me call it row 1 equal to row 1 less than array dot get length row 1 plus plus column 1, let's call it column 1, and array dot get length column 1 plus plus, and we want to print row 1 column 1. So let's run our program. So it's prompting the user enter the number of rows. Say I want to have 4 rows and 2 columns. So I'm going to enter the values 1, 2. Oh, system out of bound. So for int I equal to 0, I less than row, I plus plus. for n j equal to 0, j less than column j plus plus, array of row comma column equal to, sorry, we don't want to insert at array of row column. Instead this time we have used I and j, so in the print case we use row, but I thought this time also we used row, but here we should insert at index I comma j, not row comma column. So let's run again. Enter the number of rows. Say I want to 3 rows and 3 columns, so let me enter the number 3 4 7 6 2 8 9 0 1. So this way we can initialize the elements of a 2D array at the runtime, and we printed the 2D array. So thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to Code with Cougar, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.